Hello and welcome to R&D Tales, where I sit down with fellow R&D members to talk about different sets. So today we're talking Guilds of Ravnica, and I'm here with Erik Lauer. So,
hello, Mark.
Erik, explain to the audience who you are, so they might not know who you are.
So I'm Erik. A long time ago, I was a Pro Tour player known for building decks, and now I'm the head of set design. And so you hand off vision design sets, and some of us, I'm definitely one of the people you'd hand such a set off to.
For example, Guilds of Ravnica.
Guilds of Ravnica, yes. You led the vision.
Yeah, and you led set design.
And I led set design.
Okay, so what we want to talk today is get people behind the scenes, get a sense of what went on to making the set.
Right.
Because one of the interesting things about this particular set was there was a lot of change. Like what I handed off at Vision, a decent amount changed. Like I think 2 of the 5 mechanics were handed off, and the other 3 happened during set design.
Right.
So I thought we'd walk through the guilds and talk a little bit about what we handed off and then what ended up being it.
Right.
So do you have a guild you want to start with?
Definitely Boros, because that's
Boros.
one of the ones that did not change.
Okay, so Boros had the mentor mechanic. So this came about because one of the things we often get is Boros is the aggressive deck. You know, red-white's usually going to be the aggro deck, but people are like, can you try to mix it up a little bit? Can we do something with Boros that, while plays into the theme of Boros, is a little bit different?
Right.
And I think Mentor came about because we liked the name Mentor. We liked the concept of how would you have one character train another character. And I think when we handed over the file, it was pretty close. Like, what did you guys do with Mentor?
We changed with Mentor was I kept the mechanic exactly how it is, and just worked on how can we make this happen more often.
And so that was okay. So that was a pretty straightforward.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to one that had a little more change to. Because Mentor, we liked Mentor, we played with it.
I suggest we just go around from from Boros to Selesnya and kind of go around.
Okay, right. Because part of it is how they play with each other is a big part of how we design the sets.
Right.
Okay, so we'll talk about Selesnya.
Yes.
So when I handed over Selesnya, it had creature fall is what I think we called it, which is like landfall except for creatures.
Right.
That whenever you play a creature, it triggered. Right. And it would go on permanents, basically. So what happened? Why is creature fall not in the set?
So creature falls, it is a good mechanic. And so the issue is that part of Ravnica is the synergy between neighboring guilds. So if you're playing with white cards, you could be in Boros, you could be in Selesnya, you're probably borrowing a little bit of each. And Boros and Selesnya just had way more synergy than other groups did, because Boros' mechanic already wants you to play a lot of creatures and attack. Those are the 2 things you must do before you can even talk about just mentoring your core. Creature fall really says, well, I just played a creature, so clearly I have a lot of creatures. It only has a bonus till end of turn, I guess I should attack. And so those 2 had much more synergy than any other guilds. So it needed to change to be separate.
Right.
Selesnya definitely wants to have a lot of creatures. So the question is, what could the creatures do that does not involve attacking? And there were a couple of things, but the main one was they could produce mana. And so that got into, okay, so if they produce mana, what would it be for? And then if they all produce mana, that really is a lot of what Convoke is. Convoke is your creatures each produce 1 mana in effect.
So one of the interesting things about Guilds of Ravnica was previously in both Ravnica and Return to Ravnica, we made a rule that said every keyword mechanic was new. None of the guild words were repeats. And this time we said, okay, it's our 3rd time. We were willing to allow things to be a reprint if it made sense.
Right.
And I know you guys explored Convoke-like mechanics at some point, right?
We explored Convoke-like ones, but they were kind of, I don't want to make something that's different for just being different and not as good. Right? If it's different, but in a way that makes the set better, it doesn't necessarily have to be stronger. It has to make a better set, a better environment, a better play experience. Then, yeah, let's do that. But if it's just, the other one was great, we're just doing a different thing so we can say we made something new, no. So Selesnya and Convoke is just the perfect fit, really, as a mechanic. It was my favorite of the first 10.
So do you know, here's a trivia question, Richard Garfield designed Convoke.
Yes.
What guild did he originally turn it in for?
That's really interesting. Where would I guess it would be?
I mean, it was original Ravnica.
It was original Ravnica.
There's a clue for you.
Right. So the other choices are Golgari, Dimir, Boros.
Right, those were the 4.
Well, if it's not Selesnya, it would have to be Boros.
Yeah, he turned it in for Boros. But I felt like it just made a little bit more sense in Selesnya that was all about the creatures than it was in Boros, which was more, aggressive.
He must have missed that he was making a bunch of Llanowar elves, because it's a bunch of Llanowar elves, and there's clearly, or birds of paradise, they clearly are all, no, they only get green.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're just a bunch of Llanowar elves. It's clearly green. That's the odd part, is I actually think it's more green than, it could be a one-color mechanic and just green as far as I know.
Yeah, anyway, it was interesting. I really liked the mechanic. I shipped, that's my contribution to Convoke, because I shifted it over to Selesnya.
But we tried to do some new things. So one of them was Convoke build-around cards that say, hey, if you made a creature, so if you tap a bunch of things, I am going to produce extra results, which previously I think Convoke was just the mechanic itself. And the other was I definitely thought, well, we're bringing it back. Normally, I don't like saying this mechanic has to have a constructed cards. I like just making a bunch of potential ones and having the play designers figure that out. But I talked to them about, what if we had an Oblivion Ring that costs 4 mana? And they're like, that's really pushed. And I'm like, is it going to be a problem that it's that pushed? Unlikely. Okay, so let's just say we have some new stuff, and we have what I consider a very likely constructed card.
Okay, so now we continue around. So now we get to Golgari, because that shares green with Selesnya.
Right.
So the interesting thing is, the mechanic that I handed off, you gave to us.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about how, because Golgari's always been, Golgari and Dimir are the 2 guilds that actually, usually when we make them, we struggle the most. Like original Ravnica, I think we had like 40 different mechanics we tried for Golgari.
Right.
So talk a little bit about where your idea came from for Undergrowth.
Oh, so you had some really good ideas that I enjoyed playing, but some of the Golgari players didn't like them as much. They felt green-black, but not, or black-green, but not Golgari.
Yeah.
Because they were using the graveyard as a resource instead of talking about building up a graveyard.
Right.
And so one of the things about having 5 mechanics is you don't need to get as many designs. So I thought, scaling effects, and then someone said, I don't think there are enough, and I thought, well, let's just do the acid test and start making some cards and see how many we can make. Sure enough, there aren't a lot of, it's not as fertile a space as one would want for some sets, but it has enough for this set.
Well, I mean, the other thing about guild mechanics is guild mechanics don't need a lot of space.
Right.
You need like 8 to 12 cards for a guild mechanic. So one of the things we look for in guild mechanics is there something we couldn't expand? Like one of the things we didn't talk about for Creature Fall was that was a mechanic that was very expandable, and that just putting it in a small space wasn't kind of letting it do what it could do best. And that this is the opposite, where Undergrowth, we can make maybe 10 to 12 good cards, but you wouldn't make 14 or 18 or 16 or 20. I mean, like it's a limited number of scalable effects.
Right. There's only so many. It also brought up an interesting thing of, so you have Convoke and Undergrowth in green. And so they say you want creature cards.
Yeah.
White has Mentor and Convoke. And then came, the idea that I had was basically don't give green tokens. For a long time I had no token makers, mono green, and give white the 1/1 tokens.
Okay.
Because 1/1 tokens play really well with Mentor, and they obviously play really well with Convoke. And that's the difference between the 2 colors. Is green is about, I really just have piles and piles of creature cards.
Right.
And white is really about some 1/1s. Some tokens, some creature cards, but more about 1/1s that you can mentor onto or Convoke with.
Right, which is interesting because, for example, in original Ravnica, green making tokens was a theme of green because it overlapped for Selesnya and Golgari back then. But we obviously did a little different this time.
Well, also you've driven the color pie to better separate green and white.
That's true. Yeah.
Where white really is, we say go wide, but go wide and mostly attack with them. And green has produced the big creatures.
Right.
Convoke has both of them, but you can Convoke with your 1-drops in white. And green can be producing more of the big creatures, and the guild can synergize that way.
So we handed over Undergrowth. Did anything change during development? Did you do, like, what when you did the set design, did it change much, or just the effects changed a little bit?
The effects barely changed.
Okay.
Because the only thing that changed was initially Golgari decks were just dominating. So the only thing I changed was to move some of the self-mill out of green.
Okay. Okay, so now let's move around. So we're at Golgari has black, which goes to Dimir.
Yeah, that's curious how that works. I was just talking about how we moved some of the South Mill out of green. Where did it go?
It went to blue. Okay, so let's talk about Dimir. So we handed over a mechanic called Disguise.
Yes.
Which was a redone ninjutsu.
Right.
From Betrayers of Kamigawa, the ninja mechanic. We liked the idea. Like, one of the tricky things about doing Dimir is it's a hard guild because blue and black don't overlap a lot, and that the way they play together is they're sort of the sneaky, like they're a control deck that wins in a way that getting card advantage and sort of like slowly incrementally beating you.
Yes.
And so one of the tricks we have is how do you capture that? And so one of the things we liked in design was, well, there's a lot of sneakiness. They're the underhanded guild that has the assassins, and yes, very underhanded. And that they're definitely, we liked the idea of ninjutsu, like the flavor of ninjutsu made some sense, but we couldn't actually call it ninjutsu. So Disguise, the way Disguise worked was you swapped the card in your hand with the card in play, but the card in play was the same creature. So it kept equipment, it kept enchantments, it kept tokens. But it's a little bit, well, talk about what happened to Disguise.
Well, there were issues that some people had with the confusion in the rules, but my issue was that people who didn't want to play a deck full of creatures, if you look at Boros, piles of creatures, Selesnya, piles of creatures. I try and make sure that people who don't want piles of creatures have their guilds too.
Right.
If you were to say which guilds would be lower on creatures, clearly it's Izzet and Dimir out of here.
Yeah.
So let's say one of the two is going to get a spell mechanic, and the other one needs to get a mechanic that could go on non-creature spells or creatures. So you kind of have a diversity of how many creatures you're playing.
Right, and Disguise has to go on creatures.
Disguise, as it was defined, only goes on creatures. And frankly, it's not very easy to get away from that, given the swapping. And what does it mean? I'm swapping my sorcery with... So because of that, it really has to do with, we already have Selesnya and Boros that are extremely creature heavy. And I really try and make sure that not every guild is for everyone, but everyone has at least one guild that they really are like, that speaks to me. And even though the creature ones tend to speak to a higher percentage of people, you still need to reach everyone.
Yeah.
So that's where I really felt Dimir needed to change to something to reach a different audience.
Okay, so obviously it goes to Surveil. How did you get to Surveil?
We had a lot of different mechanics, and someone on the team, Andrew Veen, kept wanting Scry. And I was like, okay, we'll try Scry Matters. And then I noticed the problem around this time also with Golgari. And it's like, we've talked about this before. I know this is the most new space, but it is new. We haven't done this before. What if we synergized this with Golgari and said Scry, but it's not Scry because you don't put cards on the bottom, you put them in your graveyard.
Right.
And this immediately got some people to say, but I don't like putting cards in my graveyard, which reminded me of the first set we both worked on, which was Innistrad.
Yes.
People gave me the exact same feedback, and I think people are going to like this.
Yeah.
Not everyone will. It's not the same percentage, but again, I'm trying to appeal to a different group of people. The people want to do some tricky stuff, it's really about controlling information is what I sense out of Dimir.
Yeah.
So scrying definitely plays into that, but the fact that then my graveyard becomes an asset of more cards that are active in my graveyard kind of are a sense of information. I've generated this tricky advantage. I've outplayed. And I thought, well, let's just try it.
Well, another thing that I think Surveil does and Scry does is black-blue is very much about having the answers it needs when it needs it. That this, it's the deck smoothing and sort of make sure that when it comes up, because black and blue, one of the neat things about it is it has a lot of different kinds of answers.
Right.
It's got counter spells, it's got discard, it's got creature kill, it's got bounce, it's got stealing, and that one of the nice things about playing with it is you want to have the answers when you need it, and Surveil sort of like smooths it to make sure that when you need something, you have it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go down around the circle. Let's complete the circle. So we get to Izzet.
Right.
So Izzet overlaps with blue. So obviously Izzet mechanic and Dimir mechanic also like. So so Izzet what did we hand off? So we played around with. We started with splice onto instants and sorceries.
Right.
And that didn't quite work out. And then what we handed off was, what did we call it?
I don't know what it was called, but there were cards that when you cast them from your hand, you exiled them.
Right, they're instants and sorceries.
And then when you cast another instant sorcery, you could cast these, and it was handed off, and we cast them for free.
Right.
Which just made I remember playing it someone who enjoyed this, and I said, okay, now let's swap decks, and the person refused.
So let me explain what we were going for. one of the things with Is It we've always had issues with is It is like this mad inventor guild, but the mechanical identity has always been instants and sorceries. And we're like, oh, it kind of misses a little bit the mad inventor part. And so we were trying to figure out how to do instants and sorcery matters, but in a way that felt kind of a little bit like mad scientists. And so the flavor was we made spells that you would exile, and when you cast a second spell, you could play it so that you could combo and do weird connections. Right. And the idea was that there'd be small incremental effects, but the fact that you got to do it twice would be why you'd want to cast it. But obviously that caused problems, and so.
Right. It definitely caused problems when a lot of these stacked up.
Yeah.
So I was looking for something. So the previous Is It mechanics in our previous Ravnica blocks were definitely, you could spend a lot of mana and get a big effect.
Right. Well, Replicate was the first one, and Overload was the second one.
Yes.
So Replicate lets you get as many copies as you want. Overload lets you make it affect everybody.
Right. Whereas I think of Is It should be more about what you were doing, which it's kind of combinations of things, not one giant thing. You might have one giant turn.
Yeah.
And then, so to play with Dimir at this point, I came up with something of the flashback space, but actual flashback, the problem is it's really a card advantage mechanic. It's not about can I do something else, it's about I have another thing.
Right.
Sure, it's a copy of something I had before, but more important, I just have another card. It's a card, it tends to dominate the discussion, is just I'm up a card. So I came up with what, once I decided I didn't want card advantage, it wasn't that hard to come up with, well, what if you're not up a card and you have to pay a card to do it?
Okay.
And so we tried this, and it allows you to do some combinations of things, which is what I like about Is It, and plays into the, maybe when you surveil, do you want to put this in your graveyard? You could and use it later. You might want to keep it on top and do it twice, which is different from Flashback, where you basically almost always just put it in my graveyard, I'm up a card.
Right.
It also makes it a little, when it's just 8 mana, some effect that doesn't cost you a card, it's going to be hard to bleed that into Boros is the other thing. And so my idea was maybe you don't even need another cost. You're paying a card. Maybe the casting cost you paid the first time is fine for the second time, since both times cost you a card.
Yeah.
So that was definitely one of the changes we tried. We went through a lot of iterations to get to. The blue mechanics, no big surprise, were the hardest to do.
So what's the order? Okay, so obviously we handed over, Mentor was in the set, and Undergrowth was in the set at that point.
Right.
What order do the other ones get added to the set? Like what? Just to
Selesnya is definitely next.
Okay, so Convoke was next.
Convoke was next. Then there were the other two.
So did Jumpstart or Surveil get added first? Like which influenced the other getting added?
They were at the same time.
Oh, at the same time, okay.
It was playing around in both spaces, Scry, Flashback, S mechanics, and then I came up with, okay, this puts cards in the graveyard, and this is active in the graveyard. How are they going to do that? Okay, I'm just going to take out of all the Scry mechanics, actual Scry, but put in the graveyard, and of all the other mechanics, it's Flashback, you're just not up a card. I was going for more different things for a long time,
right?
But finally gave into, let's just do the simplest ones, get across what the guilds do in a simple matter, and the new stuff is in the new cards, especially a lot of these mechanics are describe what the guild and the set is about. A lot of the cards that people play with in constructed tournaments often this is just are just the gold cards regardless of whether they have the mechanics. So let's separate them two, and let's say the true novelty is a card by card basis. The mechanics, rather than making them more complicated, let's make them play right and be easy to understand to onboard you to the set.
Right. Well, one thing to also remember is normally we tend to do a little less mechanics. Like we tend to average, I say, about 3.5 mechanics per large set. And this had 5, which meant we had to kind of make them simpler just because there's just more mechanics in the set.
Right. Plus there really is a gate mechanic in the set. And
we'll talk about the gates. So what did you want to do with the gates?
So what I wanted to do with the gates was, first of all, get you enough mana fixing for limited.
Okay.
Make it possible to play a 5-color deck, because that should be a thing you do from time to time. And for blanking on the name, there's a rare land that lets you get gates out of your deck from Dragon's Maze, Maze's End.
Maze's End, yeah.
And I wanted to give cards that people could add, casual players who are playing Maze's End, that they would have some new things to put in their decks, and one of my big ones was to actually give you a new gate.
Okay, that's cool.
It's a gate that taps for any color.
Right.
And so they should have an 11th gate, which is sort of a wild card if they're trying to get 10 different names.
Right. Okay, so the other thing that you did that I thought was really cool was explain most or all Ravnica sets had hybrid.
Right.
And all Ravnica sets, or some Ravnica sets, have had split cards.
Right.
But you made the decision to put them together on the same card. How did that come about?
So initially my idea was we've had charms. I was going to make hybrid charms.
Okay.
And so at first I tried hybrid charms at 1 mana. It's hard to get 1 mana cards in a gold set because gold requires 1 mana of each color. That's 2.
Right.
So I made them. They were okay. They weren't beloved, and I was just trying other things. And I thought, you know, what this set really needs is a way maybe of dumping more mana into a card. So I just tried split cards. I really just try a lot of things. People get bothered when they hand over sets, not you, but some people, because I try so many things. And then I go back to what was there before, and they're like, what was that all about? Well, your Is It shirt, it's about the science. I got to experiment. So I experimented one time with, well, what if the hybrid cards are split cards? And so early on, you play them hybrid. And if you're playing a 3-color deck especially, this makes sense because you might not have both colors. But you want to be playing these 2 colors and not just rely hybrid cards. Sometimes you just play monocolor decks. No, you really want the additional reward of the big spell. In fact, my favorite card of the whole set is a split card.
What is your favorite card?
I believe it's called Expansion Explosion. It's the Is It Rare. And so the gold part, there was Invoke the Firemind in the original Ravnica. Was a Is It card that could either draw you X cards or deal X damage.
Right.
This one is an instant that does both for X UURR.
Okay.
And the small effect is to copy a spell, but decided sometimes copying spells makes people not want to play big things.
Right.
So I put a cap of a converted mana cost of 4.
Okay.
We experimented with what's the right number, and 4 seemed about right.
Okay.
So I don't know. To me, that card, I like cards that play differently as you play against different people. It definitely does that, where maybe you want to copy something. Sometimes the most important part is just killing a creature and drawing 2 cards. Sometimes it's a big brain geyser. It does a lot of different things, and that's what I also like about split cards, of course.
Okay, so before we wrap up for today, is there any other cool thing about Guilds of Ravnica? Any other stories you want to share about something, a card you enjoyed?
So the other cool thing is actually each color has its own theme.
Okay, go ahead. Explain that.
So white is about mostly tokens, which is why it has even a mythic rare that relates tokens into 4/4 angels.
Okay.
Green is all about having a bunch of creature cards. Black is all about the graveyard, and you'll see a bunch of cards like that. Let's see, blue is actually about decisions.
Okay.
And red is about aggression. So that was the hardest part of the whole set, was as we go around, the hardest part is we started with Mentor, got to the end.
Right.
How are you going to make this? You cast these spells and you attack, and the key is red is about aggression.
Right.
So we made a lot of the jumpstart cards work in aggressive decks.
Right. The key is the red jumpstart cards are things that the Boros player would want to play.
And we started with the Dragonauts, and then added more little creatures that get bigger when you cast a spell.
Right.
So early in the game, if you're Boros, you can just mentor onto them, and then once they have some +1/+1 counters, you could cast a removal spell or a combat trick, and they'll get bigger. So that is how we tried to do that. That way, if you're drafting Boros, and you say, Boros isn't working out. This is really important. You're drafting with 7 friends. Let's hope what you draft is influenced by your 7 friends at the table. So if too many people are drafting Boros, you should be able to go over to Is It. So your little red cards that do this, you can start off in Boros with that plan and then say, you know what, this works fine in Is It, and actually draft a different deck based on what your friends are doing.
So one of the things that I think is very interesting is that when you build a draft environment, you want to figure out, so like, I know, for example, in Guilds of Ravnica, the guilds are all something people can draft.
Right.
And then the 3-color combinations are something you assume people can draft.
Right.
It's about 10. About how many archetypes do you tend to build in?
10 usually. And the 3-color ones are why the white 1/1s have lifelink, because Jeskai just wasn't working.
Okay.
But lifelink adds a little bit of strength to the other guilds and a lot to a 3-color deck, where just a few life points can make your 3-color deck come to life. But yeah, so Naya is the most obvious. You play a bunch of creatures and mentor onto them. The Sultai,
Yeah.
you use the self-mill from blue plus all the creatures to make the true graveyardy deck, which is the 3 color combinations, with the exception of red, which is why Jeskai is the hardest, are always based around what the overlap color does.
Right.
The ones where you share the green guilds, you play the most creatures. The white ones plays the most tokens, etc.
Okay. Well, thank you. I thank you for joining us today. It was fun talking Guild of Ravnica with you. And thank you guys for joining us. So this is R&D Tales. See you next time.